This man has simply broken the political mould. He has displayed a rugged and sometimes prickly conviction to the people of Britain, and a tenacity of cause that even the toughest northeastern man would respect, while at the same time retaining his softness of heart and remaining real. This country now faces threats to our national sovereignty from our own political elite that have failed to realise in the past. However, there is an old saying which goes, "Cometh the hour, cometh the man." And this quote could not be more apt for this moment in British political history. And oh, has this man come. He is now one of the most instantly recognisable personalities in the United Kingdom and Europe. And if you don't believe me, just ask Herman Van Rompuy. Mixed with his liking of the odd pint or two, and a smoke, this man could not be more of a man of the people if he tried. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the leader of the United Kingdom Independent Party, Mr. Nigel Farage, MEP.
Shall we have another go? Good evening, everybody. Happy St. George's Day. And welcome to what is the biggest public meeting UKIP has held in its history. To see 1,200 of you here in this hall this evening says to me this party in the northeast of England is going places. Now you might have noticed yesterday one or two posters went up around the country, and it seemed to attract a fair bit of attention, because we have a career political class that have been running Westminster, and they run the three parties. You know the sort of people I'm talking about. They all go to the same handful of schools, they all go to Oxford, they all study PPE, they all leave at 22 and get a job as a political party researcher, and then become members of Parliament aged 27 or 28. They run the front benches of the three established parties, and my feeling is that we're currently run by a bunch of college kids who've never done a day's work in their lives and don't understand. And in a sense, it's that got me into politics. Because I spent 20 years working in the private sector, buying and selling copper, aluminium, lead, tin, zinc, things like that. And I spent the last 9 years of that running my own company. So whatever flaws I've got, and if you read the tabloids, they'll tell you they're many. But whatever flaws I may have, you know, I've worked in the real world, and I'm leading a party made up of real people who, you know, you can see our candidates, real people who've done real jobs. We are not going to be cowed by political correctness. You have come to a meeting of a party. We are unashamedly patriotic, proud to be who we are as a nation, sick to death of a career political class who've sold this country out to Brussels, and we want our country back. Because just look at it. You know, even if you look at your passport, the older ones in the room will remember what a British passport used to look like. They will, but the younger ones won't. But even for the younger ones, and by the way, it's great to see so many young people here in this audience tonight. That really is. But even for the younger ones, we've got this plum-coloured passport, and what's the first thing it says on it? It says European Union. I agree with that. Absolutely. That's one heckle I like. I mean, look, I don't want a European Union passport. I don't want that flag. I don't want that anthem. I don't want 75% of my laws made somewhere else. I don't want to go on paying £55 million a day. I don't want a total open border to 485 million people. I don't want Herman Van Rompuy. The timing of that was terrific, wasn't it? That on the very night that we were in Sheffield launching the national campaign, Herman Van Rompuy was not only guest of honour with Cameron at a dinner in Chequers, he was also there for a sleepover. And I thought that said rather a lot. Now let's be clear, we don't want any of those things to happen. And it's happened because 40 years ago, we were signed up for something that used to be called, can somebody remember what it was called? The Common Market. And there was a referendum on this. Did we want to stay part of the common market? Well, I couldn't vote, I was too young. You have to be over 57 to have voted in that referendum. One or two of you here qualify, I can tell. You know, and my mum and dad both took at face value what the politicians told them, and they voted to stay part of a common market because they believed that it was about trade. Nobody ever told them it would morph into a European Union. And yet we know that all the big political players knew from the start the intention was political union. Ladies and gentlemen, it might be a strong term, but we have been lied to. No other way of putting it. And this deceit continues today. It continues because they keep promising us, every time there's an election, a referendum. 5 years ago, in the last European elections, in which UKIP came second, David Cameron led the Conservative Party to victory in those European elections, promising, if you vote Conservative in this election and give us the momentum for me to become Prime Minister, I give you this cast iron guarantee that if I'm Prime Minister, there'll be a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. It hasn't happened, has it? It hasn't happened, and he asks us to trust him again. The Liberal Democrats, over the last 20 years, 1 minute promised a referendum, the next minute have withdrawn the promise. They've almost done the sort of political hokey-cokey. It's difficult to work out what their current position is, although, having said that, I think there is much that we, and myself, have to be grateful to Nick Clegg for. And I know I really must say, I'm very grateful to Nick for inviting me onto those television debates. And absolutely. we've not been allowed... Oh, cheers, Andy. Cheers, everybody. Thank you. It's not what I normally drink, I've got to tell you. I think we had a couple of yarn this afternoon, so I'm okay. But, you know, what that allowed us to do, for the first time, actually in 40 years, we were able to debate the big European questions on national television, because it's all been brushed under the carpet in the intervening period of time. So I'm grateful to Nick for that. And the Labour Party, well, they keep promising a referendum every time there's an election and then not delivering it. Remember, they promised one on the Constitution, then when it was rebranded as the Lisbon Treaty, dropped the promise. Now, I believe there has to be a full, free and fair referendum so that we, the British people, can decide who governs Britain. We've got to have that referendum, and if it wasn't for UKIP, having done well in parliamentary by-elections, having done well last year in the county council elections and getting nearly a quarter of the vote across England, if it wasn't for the growth of UKIP, I don't think even David Cameron would be talking about holding a referendum. But, promises are one thing, making this a reality is another. And that is why this European election campaign actually has been sending people to the European Parliament since 1979. Every 5 years we've had an election. Not, of course, your MEP, because this disconnect between and the people that we get, frankly, the whole thing is too remote. But these European elections matter. And I think we've kicked these European elections off with a bang. There is going to be a higher turnout in these European elections, I think, than ever before. And if you take the last half a dozen opinion polls, Labour are on 30%, we're on 27%, the Conservatives are some way back on 22 or 23%, and the Lib Dems are about where they deserve to be, in my view, down at about 7 or 8%. But the point is this: if UKIP is going to cause an earthquake in British politics, and I believe we've got the potential on May the 22nd to do that, if we're going to succeed in doing that, we have got to beat the Labour Party. And I get, that's exactly what we've got to do. And so it's no coincidence that we launched in Sheffield, and we're here today, we're in Manchester tomorrow, we're in Birmingham on Friday. We are going for the big northern conurbations, the big northern cities. We're going for the Labour heartlands, and we're saying to Labour voters in particular, we're saying, look, this Labour Party, and indeed this trade union movement that used to stand up and represent the interests of ordinary working people and families in this country, they have turned their backs on you in favour of the European project and big corporatism in the private sector. You are no longer represented by that party. We will stand up and fight for it. If we get this right, we will beat the Labour Party, we'll beat them in their heartlands, we will top the polls on May the 22nd, and we will get the Labour Party to change their position on a referendum. Miliband will be forced by his own backbenches to box this issue off, and so we'll get the Labour and Tory parties going into the next election, both promising a referendum, but this time, because of strength of public opinion, not being able to rat on the deal. And my hope and belief is that UKIP gets big momentum on May the 22nd, and we're then able to target seats for the 2015 general election, and that we will have enough MPs to hold the balance of power, as Nick Clegg did back in 2010, and I'll tell you something, there will be a referendum then, and we will get ourselves out of the European Union. Now, there are lots of issues that will dominate over the course of the next few weeks. The first thing that we should be talking about is why we pay £55 million a day to be a member of a club that hasn't signed its accounts off for the last 18 years in a row. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the fact that 75% of our laws are now made in Brussels, and that there's nothing we can do at any general election by voting in a new government that can change any one of those laws or regulations. And so therefore our democracy, our rights of self-government, our ability to determine our own future, and I would put it to you, those things that our grandparents actually fought and in some cases died for, we have got to regain and get back so we can give it on to our children and grandchildren. But the issue that will absolutely dominate over the course of the next few weeks is the issue of open-door immigration. It has suited our political class to try to treat the European debate as being over here and the immigration debate as being over there. Oh, no, they're two entirely separate things. Well, of course, we've been saying for years they're one and the same. Because in 2004, we opened up the doors, if you remember, to 8 former communist countries from Eastern Europe. Now, David Blunkett, who was the Home Secretary at the time, said that it would lead to an extra 13,000 people a year coming to Britain. I think he must have been preoccupied with his private life at the time, I don't know. Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that if you say to people in poor countries with poor prospects, they can come to a relatively rich country, they can bring their kids, educate them in the state system, use the National Health Service, earn money that is 7 or 8 times the minimum wage in their home country. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to come in big numbers, aren't they? And well over 1 million have come. But can I please make this absolutely clear to every one of you? You know, if you come along tonight and you're expecting to hear me being anti-Europe, anti-European and anti-European people, you're in for a very major disappointment. Because I don't blame any of those people from Eastern Europe for coming here. You know, if I was an 18-year-old in Bucharest, I'd have been on the first EasyJet flight on January the 1st to Luton Airport. I then, of course, would have seen Keith Vaz gone back again, but that's another issue. But we are not against any of those people. We're not against any of the countries in Europe. What we are against are a British political class who, through open-door migration into Britain, have given our own workers wage deflation over the course of the last 10 years, at the same time as the gas bill has gone up, and led to a doubling of youth unemployment in this country since 2004. I accept that open-door immigration and mass cheap labour is good for rich people, because it means cheaper nannies and cheaper chauffeurs and cheaper gardeners. And it's good for very big businesses and it's good for big landowners because it keeps their wage bills down. But it has been a disaster for millions of ordinary decent families in this country, and surely it is the primary duty of a British government to put the interests of our own people first. And that argument is so strong, that argument is so powerful, that in the recent British Social Attitude Survey, 77% of people in this country said they wanted us to take back border controls in this country. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem or the BBC, it doesn't matter what any of them say. You know, they can attempt to paint our position to be extreme. They can call us all the names under the sun. I'm getting quite used to that these days. They can do what they like. But actually what we represent is the common sense position. We want to have an immigration policy that is based on control, not just of quantity, but of quality. And what madness is it that we now discriminate against quite highly skilled people who might want to come here from India or New Zealand in favour of people from Romania or Bulgaria. We've turned our backs on the world because of an open-door immigration policy to Europe. We need to control the numbers, we need to control the quality. I think Australia have actually got the right kind of immigration system, and long-term the kind of one we should have in. Just look how the Aussies manage it. You know, you've got to be under 45, you've got to be qualified, you've got to have a skill or a trade to bring to Australia. You're not allowed to go to Australia if you've got a criminal record, which is odd in a way, isn't it? Because in the old days, it used to be a prerequisite. You won't. Any Aussies here? No, thank goodness for that. I just have to get back after the Ashes series, you know, it was so painful. You can't go there if you've got a life-threatening disease. And as John Howard, the Prime Minister of the time, said, we don't care where you come from. We don't care what colour you are. We don't care what religion you are. But if you come to our country, you learn the language, you adopt the culture, and you become part of our experience. So that question, I think, is going to dominate the campaign because it is the #1 concern of British people. They're worried about wage deflation. They're worried about youth unemployment. They're worried about the lack of primary school places. They're worried about the fact that in every city and market town in this country, we've effectively, over the course of the last 10 years, opened up sections of those towns and cities in which people don't speak English. They're worried about waiting times, an accident, an emergency. They're worried about the fact that on current trends, another 3 million people will come to settle in our relatively overcrowded island between now and 2020. And I think the arguments UKIP have got are not only in tune with the British people, I think they're bomb-proof, logical, common-sense arguments. And this is the issue that I believe will win us the European election campaign on May the 22nd this year. But I also want to talk, as this campaign develops, about some of the positives. You know, some of my critics have said that I've been very good at being negative about the European Union and some of the individuals within it. I guess YouTube maybe does pay some testament to that fact. But there is no longer any need for me to tell you or anybody else in this country what is wrong with the European Union, what is wrong with our membership of it. What we've now got to start doing is getting ready for that referendum when it comes with some solid, positive arguments about why this country would be better off outside. Why Nissan will, of course, still be selling their cars to Europe, because at the same time, we'll be buying Mercedes and Audi and BMW, and we buy 1 million cars a year more from Europe than we sell to Europe. The German car industry would insist on a trade deal. So we have to make the point that when Cleggers and the others, you know, tell us that millions of jobs are at risk, they're wrong. It's probably just their jobs, actually, that are at risk. But we've got to point something out, which is this. We're part of a customs union. It is an outdated 19th century concept. And what it means is we aren't just bound by a set of rules within the club, we're also bound by the rules without the club. And what that means is we are prohibited, we are forbidden from making our own trade arrangements and our own trade deals with any other country in the world. But we're told by Clegg and Cameron and Miliband, we're told we need to be part of this big club, otherwise we'd be too small to negotiate our own trade deals on the world stage. Do you know, last year, Iceland, which has a population of 320,000, Iceland negotiated their own free trade deal with China. If a country the size of Iceland can negotiate its own deals, I'm damn certain a country that is the 6th biggest economy in the world, with 64 million people, can negotiate whatever trade deals it wants with any country in the world. All we need is to have the self-confidence in ourselves to say we can do it and not to surrender this to some unelected official. that offers is fantastic. Because, you know, out there's a group of countries that have within them 2 billion people. They speak English. They have a common law system. They have similar contract law in many cases. They actually like us. They're our friends. And they're called the Commonwealth. And they have within them many of the new booming economies in the world. And it was a travesty that we turned our back on the Commonwealth 40 years ago. It's about time we moved to and I want to make some of the arguments over the next few weeks about the madness of the energy policy that we've signed up to in Brussels. Yes, I know many people are concerned about carbon dioxide emissions, but what is the point? What is the point in us pursuing a strategy for wind energy? I mean, personally, I think they're god-awful, pig-ugly monsters that are ruining our uplands and our seascapes, and I don't like them on a aesthetic ground. Never know anything else. But the real point about wind energy is it has to be subsidised. And it's being subsidised by you, because you pay a 10 to 12% surcharge on your bill every year, which will be 20% by 2020. But the real cost of this is being paid by Britain's manufacturing industry. Energy is the key component of manufacturing. You know, the INEOS plant on the other side of the Pennines at Runcorn, that plant uses more energy than the whole of Liverpool City. 40% of the cost of a steelworks or a car plant, 40% of that cost is the energy bill. And at the very same time that the Americans have gone for shale gas, that the Indians and Chinese have gone for coal on a scale and a tonnage that none of us in this room could simply believe, they've reduced prices of energy, and we've gone for wind energy, and we're now paying over double for energy that our direct manufacturing competitors are paying, and carbon emissions, whatever our concern about them, are going up massively. What is the point of closing down steelworks in Redcar, aluminium smelting, seeing the cement industry disappear, hearing that even our refineries may not stay in this country? What is the point of doing that when the Indians and Chinese are building 4 new coal-fired power stations every single week? It doesn't make sense. We're not even reducing carbon emissions because that manufacturing that was here now takes place in India and elsewhere. So I want us, once we're free of the European Union, to get back to having our own energy policy, producing cheaper energy, giving you cheaper bills, and giving British manufacturing and jobs in heavy industry a proper chance in this country. I think in every way, we'd not only be better off economically, not only be better off politically, but we'll actually be better off in terms of our own self-confidence, in terms of a feeling of who we are as a nation, of what we represent. And we should be proud of many of those things. Proud that we were the country that developed parliamentary democracy. Proud of the fact that since Magna Carta, albeit with its problems, but we've had the best and fairest judicial system in the world, given that we have our right of habeas corpus, the presumption of innocence before guilt, and our right to trial by jury. I believe, collectively, that our political class have lost confidence. They don't believe we're good enough. They believe we have to surrender everything to be governed by these ludicrous institutions in Brussels and Strasbourg and Luxembourg. And I'm here leading a party that is unashamedly patriotic with a small p. We're not against anybody. We don't discriminate on the grounds of race or religion, but we just believe it's about time this country got up off its knees, stood on its own 2 feet, governed herself, and traded with the world. And I think this country message. So I have a question to ask you. Are you ready to join the People's Army to lead us to a big victory on May the 22nd? Are you ready to join the One last question. For all of you in this audience that are not members of UKIP, hands up. Well over half. Right, would you lock that door? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to a public meeting. It's a shame those guys tried to disrupt us earlier. Remember, we're the only party doing this. We're the only party doing genuine public. Along here because you're a UKIP member, that's great. Whether you've come along as a non-member because you haven't made your mind up, that's great. Whether you've come along to absolutely confirm your suspicion that you can't stand me, you know, that's fine. That's fine too. But we're proud to be putting on these public meetings to big audiences up and down the country who come along tonight leaving and believing in what we're trying to do. Please don't go back home and tomorrow night moan at the news at 10 and say, isn't it awful? Do something and come and give us a hand. Because if everybody that feels the way we do lends us a hand, we will win. Thank you. There is...
Thank you. What did I say? Cometh the hour, cometh the man. I give you the next Prime Minister of this country. Now, when we sent out the tickets to you people, we asked you questions that you'd like putting to the panel, and in particular Nigel. We've selected some of them, and I'd like to read them out. That's okay with you, Nigel? Okay. The first question is from Nick Sundin and Joshua Gilroy. Here in the Northeast, we have a very high percentage of NEETs. Well, if you don't know what that means, it means not in education, employment or training amongst our young people. How would UKIP reform education, both school and higher/further education, to improve the life chances of future generations?
Right, I've got a bit of trouble over this one recently, as I have with many things. I said I blame Maureen Lipman for everything, and she took me literally. What I meant was, do you remember that TV advert? It was a BT advert, wasn't it? When she says to her grandson, oh, you've got knowledge, that's good, isn't it? You know, he's got knowledge. My feeling, our feeling as a party, is that we have tried to promote university education as being something that virtually everybody should do, when the truth of it is, university education should be for those of a sufficient secure academic. And that we turned our backs, in fact we turned our noses up at the idea of our sons and daughters from the age of 16 or 18 learning trades and skills. It's extraordinary. You know, I'm married to a woman from Northern Europe, you know, and if their son or interior designer, whatever it may be, you know, it's crack open the champagne. They're delighted, they're proud, and we seem to look down upon people that want to do trades and skills. So there needs to be a cultural change, I would suggest, Amjad, in this country. But let's start bigging up people learning trades and skills, and let's start saying that the many people going to university, leaving with a relatively weak degree, because they're not academics, is not advancing them in the labour market, and they're coming out with a pile of debt around their neck. University is right for some people, it's not right for everybody.
The next question comes from Patricia Davidson. Why is the UK paying farmers, why is the EU paying farmers to keep their fields empty, yet globally we are told there is a food shortage? Is this leading to a balance of trade deficit with the rest of the EU in food? What will be the consequence for farming in Britain if we leave the EU?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of questions there in one question, but in short, every single British Prime Minister, since Edward Heath, has said they would reform the common agricultural policy. The last big one was Tony Blair, who at the height of his powers went to renegotiate the common agricultural policy, achieved absolutely nothing, in return for which he surrendered a further £7 billion of our rebate. So Mrs Thatcher couldn't reform the EU, Blair couldn't reform the EU, and yet Dave says that he's going to walk into the room, not even carrying the big stick, which says if I don't get what I want, we'll leave, saying whatever you give me, I'll vote for us to stay anyway, and is somehow going to get a change. He's not going to get a change. The common agricultural policy is desperately outdated. I know we've got a farmer from Norfolk who's an MEP of ours and sits on the agricultural committee over there. Farmers are deeply frustrated. Farmers hate being paid not to produce things on fields. It isn't the instinct of a farmer. We have to accept that there are parts of this country's farming that will need to continue to receive some form of subsidy. But we need to get ourselves out of a regime where we put massive tariffs on New Zealand butter and New Zealand lamb and green beans that come from poor black Africa, and by opening our markets up, by getting rid of CAP, by reducing tariffs, we will bring down the food bill for the average British family by £400 a year, whilst at the same time being able to help the bits of British agriculture that need our support. Wouldn't that be better? And there is a subset to the common agricultural policy. It is called the common fisheries policy. You know, and across the North Sea, the Norwegians have a 200-mile exclusive economic zone that is theirs. And if a boat from the northeast or Scotland wants to go and catch herrings or mackerel, they can do so, but they have to pay for the privilege of doing so. And what have we got? We've got fishing rights up to 6 miles off this coast, and that's pretty much it. The rest of it is a free-for-all. We are only allowed to catch in what are British territorial waters under 20% of the fish in those waters by value. Frankly, that industry has been completely surrendered on the European altar, and one of the benefits of not being part of the European Union is we will take back our territorial waters, what is rightfully ours, and let's get the British fishing industry back on its feet.
The next question comes from Matthew McPherson. With the tremendous electoral success that UKIP has seen over recent years, how willing would you be to form part of a government after the 2015 general elections? And if so, what terms would you demand?
Well, Matthew, I think you're jumping the gun a bit here, old son. Can we just focus, please, on what we've got to do 4 weeks this Thursday, which is to fight this European election campaign, to win it, to then get the momentum behind us that will lead us on to big and good things in 2015. All I will say is this: there was, for the first time, an opinion poll that was published at the weekend, where in a parliamentary British constituency, UKIP was with the Lib Dems and Tories on 28. So this idea, this comfort that the political class have given themselves, that UKIP that is eroding, that is really beginning to disappear. Really, Matthew, I answered this earlier. To make up the as Cleggers and the Lib Dems did in 2010, there will be a referendum. I'll make you no more promises than that, but hey, our country back be worth that.
The next question is to Jonathan. It's from Paul Hewitson, who asks, what are the consequences of Ed Miliband's CO2 reduction legislation for UK heavy industry, such as the steel and chemicals industry of Teesside? He said he was leading the country on a climate change, but was he leading us up a blind alley instead?
Well, the one-word answer, of course, to that is yes. Nigel has already given a very good explanation of how 40% of firms like that energy bills are currently 40% of their turnover is currently going on energy bills. So quite clearly it is causing them a massive problem. I'll give one example. A pupil that I used to teach has gone on to run quite a successful scrap metal business. And he sells scrap metal, and he used to sell scrap metal to firms in the UK. And now he finds that firms in India will give him a better price for that metal to go all the way out to India, the cost of transporting, so that they can deal with it themselves, because they have lower wages, which frankly there isn't that much that we can do about, but also because they've got substantially lower energy bills. And that means that we're in a position where we are putting our own steel industry out of business by having uncompetitively high energy prices in this country. We are going to lead to unemployment. It's often been said that for every job created through green energy, don't they always talk about how many jobs green energy creates? Well, for every job that is created through green energy, 3 or 4 are lost in the real world as a result of the higher energy prices.
Another one for you, Nigel. This is from Yarn School. Do you believe that there will be some point soon in the future where UKIP is accepted as a serious mainstream party, or will the media always regard you as a political outsider?
Oh, it's a tough one, Yarn School. I far prefer being an outsider, of course, in many ways. I don't know. I mean, Mr. Cameron's been the best at this, hasn't he? You know, he's called us eccentrics and cranks, and a particular favourite of mine, fruitcakes. You know, we're all a bunch of raving nutters, and then we're extremists. And yet we can see from the opinion polls that actually we represent the settled, clear, mainstream majority in this country. I think the days of mockery of UKIP by either the other politicians or by the media, I think they're over. I think we will be taken as a serious force, and yeah, that means we're going to get criticism, and that's, you know, that's fair enough. That's how the game works. But no, the days of mockery are over. It reminds me of that great story from Bob Monkhouse. Bob Monkhouse, masterful one-liners. Bob Monkhouse said, when I was growing up, I told my friends and family that when I was older, I was going to become a comedian, and they laughed at me. Well, he said, they're not laughing now.
This seems to be a joint effort. John Davis, Daniel Davis Donkin, Dennis King ask you, is it true that the EU has not had its accounts signed off for over 18 years? If so, why should we pay them £55 million per day? Could we report them to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs for fraud?
Yes, it's true. No, we shouldn't. And frankly, I wish we could.
This is one for you, Jonathan. It's from Eileen Barker. She says, UKIP MEPs have a low attendance rate at the European Parliament. I would like to ask Jonathan Arnott if he thinks this is acceptable.
Well, I think I should answer that. Not Jonathan, with respect. Although, of course, Jonathan is going to become our first MEP for the North East of England, and who knows? The opinion polls show that we're about 4% behind the Labour Party in this region. If we top the Labour Party, we won't just get Jonathan elected, we'll get 2 people elected in the North East, and beating Labour in the North East, that'd be a mini earthquake, wouldn't it? That wouldn't be a bad thing to do. UKIP MEPs go to Brussels and Strasbourg and to go native and to become part of the system. UKIP MEPs are elected to go there, to find out what's going on, to report it back to this country, and to vote against every single piece of EU legislation that is put in front of them. Our job is to end our time there. We are the turkeys that would vote for Christmas. We don't want MEPs. We want to end the thing. We want a relationship with Europe that is based on good next door neighbours and nothing more than that.
Next one comes from Ian Cronier. What are your views on Labour and Conservatives raising the retirement age? Does it not affect both young and old in an adverse manner? Going forward, how can we afford to finance care of the elderly in the future?
Let me do the first part of that. You know, back in '97, Tony Blair, newly elected Prime Minister, asked Frank Field to go away and think the unthinkable in terms of pensions and retirement ages and where we should go. And Frank Field went away, he thought the unthinkable, he reported it back to Tony Blair, who promptly sacked him. And we buried our heads in the sand. Look, we all know that when the old age pension came in 1908, you know, there were not that many men that lived far beyond 70 years, and that our ages are going up and up and up, and that ultimately we are going to have a retirement age that is significantly higher than it currently is. The regret is we should have phased this in a very long time ago. Clearly, we can't bring it in for people who are over 40 because that would be grossly unfair, but I think the younger people in the workplace have to be encouraged in every way to save in occupational schemes, which the government is trying to encourage people to do, because if we carry on and we haven't got the courage, ultimately, to raise the retirement age, we're going to run out of money. But the country's almost run out of money already. So, yeah, we've got to grasp this nettle. We're going to have to raise progressively retirement ages. Care for the elderly, there have been a lot of methods looked at to cope with this. Ultimately, there is only one real answer for long-term care for the elderly in this country. We're going to have to generate more wealth because the bill for that is going to go up and not down. We're going to have to be a country that makes more money and brings in more revenue in taxation. And I haven't got a silver bullet that solves all of this, but I do believe that by getting out of the European Union, by getting rid of excessive legislation, by not paying a massive membership fee, and by opening this country up to trading with the Commonwealth and the other parts of the world, we will give ourselves a chance to be a richer country, and in doing so, treat our elderly with a better degree of dignity.
The next question is asked by Colin Steele. It's addressed to Jonathan. Nick Clegg thinks it's 7%. The BBC thinks it's 19%. Bill Cash and Chuka Amuna put it at 50%. Nigel Farage stated yesterday that it was 75%. What percentage of our laws and regulation do you think come from Brussels?
Well, I'm going to surprise you now with Nigel sitting right there. I'm going to say 75%, aren't I? Nick Clegg came up with this 7% figure. This idea has been around for a few years. I did a little bit of research on this back in 2008-2009 when Labour's Richard Corbett, who was then the deputy leader of Labour's MEPs, was doing this, and it's all come back from a House of Commons standard note and then later a House of Commons research paper. And it talks about what percentage of UK Acts of Parliament and what percentage of statutory instruments are used to enforce EU legislation. Now, a statutory instrument can be something as minor as amending the speed limit on a motorway during some roadworks, switching on and off a bus lane, amending some regulations or an annual amount or a figure on something. They're trivial, they're tiny. Now, the EU, of course, has directives and it has regulations. We have to input directives into our law. Regulations become law without going through Parliament. Now, if you've had over 3,500 of those regulations that are laws in the UK, the old European Constitution called them European laws. You know, if it talks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. They are laws. And all of those aren't counted in Nick Clegg's dishonest 7% figure. So when you do the figures, when you take out the statutory instruments that aren't actually laws, and when you look at all of that, you can justify any figure, really between 60% and 85%. You can justify any of that. And of course, the German Constitutional Court says 84%. Viviane Reding, the EU Commissioner, says 75%. So frankly, I think Nigel with his 75% is in pretty good company, isn't he?
The real answer is too many. You know, whichever it is, too many. Amjad, I'm going to do one more question. It's been a long day. I don't care how many you've got, I'm doing one more.
Okay. Linda Moore asks, how would UKIP better control Britain's borders once we're outside of the EU?
Right, last question. Can I begin just by saying, once again, fantastic to see a huge crowd of people here, over half of whom are not members of UKIP. It's a magnificent venue. And big thanks from me to Amjad Bashir, who was paid for this whole shindig tonight out of his own pocket in support of our campaign. Thank you very, very much. Linda, the answer to your question is we cannot control our borders all the while we're members of the European Union at all, because we have a total people, and that is madness. We've got to get ourselves out of political union. We've got to give ourselves the ability to control our own borders. Longer term, as I said, we want the Australian system, where if people want to settle here, they've got to prove they've got a good reason to settle here. And shorter term, we must get back to the idea of people having work permits. If someone's got a skill to bring to this country that we need, we give them a work permit for a year or 2 years. They have to bring with them their own private medical cover. We're not going to educate their children or do anything. They will come here to work and earn money rather than have the automatic right, not just to work, but to settle and to be entitled not just to out-of-work benefits, but in-work benefits from day one. We've lost our marbles on this. We've lost any sense of balance and any sense of reason. And the political elite in Westminster can scream all they like. The massive majority of us want proper border controls so we can decide who comes to live, work and settle in our country. And this is the issue, folks, on which we're going to win not just the European elections on May the 22nd, but transform the face, I believe, of British politics. Thank you.
Before I wind up this meeting, I would like to thank all the team of North East who put together this marvellous event. It's through sheer hard work that this has been achieved. It's not just money, it's effort, and I think that we should all put your hands together for the team. I would like to thank you all for turning up in such large numbers to support us. And as Nigel said, you know, support us on the 22nd of May, support us for the future, become our members, join the People's Army. Thank you very much.
Thank you.